When I inherited my grandparents' $900,000 estate, I quietly moved it into a trust, just in case. Last week, my brother showed up with Mom, grinning. We had the house signed into my name. You're out by Friday. I just smiled and said, "You really think I'd let that happen?" 2 days later, they returned with movers. And froze when they saw who was standing on the porch, holding the folder. So, picture this: my life had just been turned upside down, not in a bad way, but in a way that felt like the universe had decided to hand me a massive, unexpected gift wrapped in bittersweet sorrow. My beloved grandparents, the two people who had truly been my anchors in this chaotic world, had passed away within months of each other, leaving behind an emptiness that still aches in my chest. They were everything to me, my safe harbor, and their home, a charming old Victorian with a sprawling garden, was filled with a lifetime of their love and memories. It was more than just a house, it was the heart of my childhood, the place where I always felt unconditionally loved. When the will was read, it turned out they had left their entire estate, valued at a staggering $900,000, to me. I was floored, truly, not just by the amount, but by the profound trust they had placed in me. The estate wasn't just the house, it included a substantial sum in their savings, some investments they had meticulously managed over the years, and a small collection of antique furniture and art pieces that held immense sentimental value. My mother and brother, on the other hand, had always had a strained relationship with my grandparents, often only showing up when they needed something, and their absence at family gatherings was more common than their presence. Because of this, they were explicitly left out of the will, a decision my grandparents had made years ago and never wavered on, despite my attempts to bridge the gap between them. I knew, deep down, that this inheritance would stir up trouble, because my mother and brother had a long history of entitlement and a knack for trying to claim what wasn't theirs, always seeing themselves as victims of circumstance while everyone else owed them something. I remembered countless times my grandparents had quietly bailed them out of financial scrapes, only for their generosity to be met with demands for more, and I knew this pattern would inevitably resurface, especially with such a significant amount of money now in play. The moment the lawyer confirmed the inheritance, a cold dread settled in my stomach alongside the grief. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about what I knew my family would do. My mother, bless her heart, had always had a way of twisting situations to her advantage, and my brother, well, he was her willing accomplice, always ready to execute her schemes. I could already hear the indignant phone calls, the accusations of me manipulating my elderly grandparents, the dramatic tears, and the thinly veiled threats. I knew I had to protect my grandparents' legacy, and more importantly, protect myself from the inevitable onslaught. So, I did something that felt both shrewd and necessary. I quietly moved the entire estate into an irrevocable trust. I didn't shout it from the rooftops, I didn't even mention it to anyone in the family. It was a silent, strategic move, advised by a brilliant estate lawyer my grandparents had actually recommended to me years ago, a woman named Ms. Eleanor Vance, who had a reputation for being as sharp as a tack and as discreet as a shadow. She explained the nuances of an irrevocable trust, how it would protect the assets from any future claims, creditors, or even legal challenges, ensuring that my grandparents' wishes were honored without question. The process was meticulous, involving countless documents, appraisals, and legal filings, but I went through every step diligently, making sure every single asset, from the house deed to the last penny in their investment accounts, was securely placed within the trust's protective embrace. I remember the immense sense of relief I felt when the final papers were signed, a quiet triumph against the storm I knew was brewing, a storm that would inevitably arrive with my family at its eye, demanding their perceived share. I kept a copy of every document, every email, every conversation, meticulously organized in a sturdy, dark green folder, a tangible symbol of the fortress I had built around my inheritance. For a few months, there was an eerie calm, a silence that was almost more unsettling than the storm itself. I spent my days sorting through my grandparents' belongings, cherishing every memory, and slowly, gently, moving into their home, making it my own while preserving its essence. I knew it was only a matter of time before my mother and brother caught wind of the inheritance, and I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. Then, last week, it happened. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of tea, when I heard a car pull up, and then the familiar, insistent knock on the front door. My heart sank, but I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked to the door, preparing myself for the performance I knew was about to unfold. Standing on my porch, with the sun glinting off their smug faces, were my mother and my brother, Mark. They were practically radiating an air of self-satisfaction, their grins wide and unsettling, like two cats who had just swallowed a canary. My mother, ever the dramatic one, stepped forward first, her eyes glinting with a triumphant sparkle I knew all too well. "Well, look who it is," she purred, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that sent shivers down my spine. Mark just stood there, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips, clearly enjoying the show. I just looked at them, my expression carefully neutral, waiting for the punchline. My mother then leaned in conspiratorially, as if sharing a delightful secret, and said, "We have some wonderful news, dear. We had the house signed into Mark's name. You're out by Friday." My blood ran cold for a split second, a primal fear seizing me, but then, just as quickly, a wave of calm washed over me, bolstered by the knowledge of the trust. They truly believed they had pulled off the ultimate coup, that they had outsmarted me, that they had finally gotten what they felt they were owed. I could see the victory in their eyes, the anticipation of my shock and despair. But I wasn't shocked, not really. I had anticipated this, perhaps not the exact method, but certainly the intent. I simply smiled, a genuine, albeit small, smile, and looked directly at my brother, then at my mother, and said, my voice calm and steady, "You really think I'd let that happen?" The smiles faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing their faces, but they quickly recomposed themselves, clearly thinking I was bluffing, or perhaps in denial. My mother scoffed, "Oh, darling, don't be silly. It's all legal and proper. We have the papers right here," and she gestured vaguely towards Mark, who patted his jacket pocket, a triumphant gleam back in his eyes. I just maintained my calm, unwavering gaze, letting the silence hang in the air, allowing their moment of imagined victory to slowly deflate under the weight of my quiet confidence. They left soon after, their triumphant grins replaced by a simmering frustration, clearly bewildered by my lack of a meltdown. The next 2 days were a blur of nervous anticipation. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. I spent that time making a few discreet phone calls, ensuring all my ducks were in a row, double-checking the trust documents, and mentally preparing myself for the next act in their theatrical play. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a quiet resolve. I had done everything by the book, and I trusted Ms. Vance implicitly. I knew that what they were attempting was not only morally reprehensible but legally unsound, and I had the proof to back it up. I pictured the dark green folder, sitting securely in my study, a silent guardian of my grandparents' wishes. I even took a moment to walk through the house, touching the familiar walls, looking at the photographs, reaffirming my connection to this place, to the love that permeated every corner, reminding myself what I was fighting for. I knew they would return, probably with a flourish, expecting to catch me off guard, to overwhelm me with their sheer audacity. And they did. 2 days later, the sound of a large truck rumbling down the street shattered the morning quiet. I looked out the window and saw it, a massive moving truck, emblazoned with a local moving company's logo, pulling into my driveway. My heart pounded, but I felt a strange sense of calm, a readiness for the final confrontation. My mother and brother emerged from their car, their faces once again alight with that same smug, self-satisfied grins, only this time, they were even wider, more confident. They were accompanied by 2 burly movers, who started to approach the front door, clearly ready to begin emptying the house. My mother, her voice practically a shout, called out, "We're here to help you move out, dear. Don't worry, we'll be quick." Mark stood beside her, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk plastered across his face, clearly relishing what he thought was his moment of victory. They marched towards the porch, their eyes fixed on me, expecting to see me defeated, perhaps even in tears. But as they got closer, their steps faltered, their grins slowly dissolving into expressions of utter disbelief, then shock. Because standing right there on the porch, beside me, was Ms. Eleanor Vance. She was impeccably dressed, as always, in a sharp navy suit, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her piercing blue eyes fixed on my mother and brother with an intensity that could stop a charging bull. In her hand, she held my dark green folder, the one containing all the trust documents, clearly visible for them to see. The movers, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, froze in their tracks, looking from my family to Ms. Vance with confusion. My mother's jaw dropped, and Mark's eyes widened in horror, his face paling considerably. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Ms. Vance, without a single word, simply held up the folder, its contents a silent, undeniable testament to their failed scheme. She then spoke, her voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Good morning. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. This property, and all assets associated with the late Mr. and Mrs. Thompson's estate, are legally held within an irrevocable trust, of which my client here," she gestured to me, "is the sole beneficiary and trustee. Any attempts to transfer ownership or remove property are not only illegal but will be met with immediate legal action." She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her words, delivered with such quiet authority, were more devastating than any shout. My mother stammered, but we have the papers. We signed them." Ms. Vance simply raised an eyebrow, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that conveyed a world of disdain. "Those papers, I assure you, are entirely invalid. The property was placed in trust well before any such fraudulent attempts could be made. I have all the necessary documentation right here," she said, tapping the folder with a perfectly manicured finger. Mark, who had been completely silent, finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. This isn't possible." The movers, clearly uncomfortable, started to back away, sensing they were caught in the middle of a very messy, very public family drama. My mother, her face now a mask of fury mixed with utter defeat, lunged forward. "You tricked us. You conniving little." But Ms. Vance simply stepped forward, blocking her path, her presence radiating an undeniable authority. "I suggest you both leave immediately," she stated, her voice firm, "before I am forced to involve law enforcement for trespassing and attempted fraud." The words hung in the air, heavy with their implications. My mother and brother stood there, completely stunned, their grand plan utterly shattered. The movers, seeing the writing on the wall, quickly started to pack up their equipment, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding disaster. My mother, defeated, finally turned and stormed back to her car, Mark trailing behind her, his head down, the picture of a broken man. They drove away in silence, leaving behind only the lingering scent of their dashed hopes. I stood there with Ms. Vance, watching them go, a profound sense of relief washing over me, mixed with a deep sadness for the family I once had, now irrevocably broken by greed. My grandparents' legacy was safe, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that they would have been proud.